Good morning, everybody. Here we are on day 2, the official day 2 of the Cannes Lions Festival. We are here in the wonderful eBay space in the Majestic Hotel with our partner iotec to put together a semicircular discussion, aka a round table, to talk about transparency, to have a look at where we are, what the state of the industry is, what clients are doing, what they think about it, what brands, what agencies are doing, what media owners are doing, and what the whole industry as a whole is doing, and how we can get around this issue. Is it a big issue? We will cover as many different points as we can. We have a wonderful array of panelists here. The only thing I believe I'm missing in this is a female voice, but we'll do our best to get over that. But we do have a bunch of experts. So we have here with us from left to right, we have Lee Boniface, who is the CMO for Canon. We have Dom Blacklock from the Seven Stars, who's the head of programmatic there. We have Paul Wright, who is the CEO of iotec. We have Sital Banerjee, who is the global head of media for Philips. We have Nick Manning, who is the CEO and founder of Ubiquity. And we have Fung Nguyen from eBay, which is wonderful for us. And we have Gabe Greenberg, who is the CEO and founder of Gabcon. So I think the kind of best place to do and to set the context for us is to kind of ask you guys, what is transparency? It's a word that we're hearing a lot. At one point, we've gone through a lot of words in this industry that have been kind of buzzwords, but I feel this is something more than a buzzword from all the things I've heard. But who would like to kind of kickstart and give their opinion on what transparency actually means in this industry?
Shall I have a go?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Go on, Nick, off we go.
Transparency is all about advertising effectiveness in my head. It is allowing advertisers, whoever they may be, to be able to make the right media investment decisions. And in order to do that, they have to have access to all of the relevant data, all the relevant research, understand all the money flows, know what monies are going where, but also know what advertising effectiveness looks like, what's working, what isn't working, how they analyze that through data and reporting. And they need to have complete visibility throughout their entire chain so that advertising is as effective and efficient as it possibly can be. So it covers a whole wide range of things and not just the money.
I would add to that. I think the money is an important part. It's an area that brands and agencies are incredibly focused on, but the concept of black box needs to go away as well. The inventory source, the quality of the content, the quantity of the content also needs to be fully transparent and exposed. So operating in a black box and using some methods of algorithms or other things to find audience without being fully transparent in terms of where your media will run is effectively not transparency, right?
I think for us, transparency is in 3 ways is how we look at it. Transparency around cost, so the entire value chain, and how does cost, the investment move from an advertiser to reaching the end consumer and engaging with them. So around cost, transparency around data. What are the data sources? Who is owning the data? How are we using data? Yeah, to again provide value and add value to the investments that we as advertisers make. And the third one is transparency around results, with a bunch of metrics that you would have decided as an industry or as an advertiser specific to your requirements. How are we delivering on those results? So these are the 3 areas that if we get a better visibility on, I believe we are moving in the right direction in terms of transparency.
I think the interesting point around the transparency piece is, from a brand, it actually starts a lot more with what's your strategy, what you're trying to achieve, because if you can't really brief your media partner very well, then actually they don't really know what they need to achieve. So from our perspective, I think we spend a lot more time now about who are the audience, what are the customer, where do we want them to go, what do we want them to achieve. Then we can hold our media partners much more accountable against that. I think if we're too woolly and vague up front, then they can be transparent with the data and the information, but actually what are you measuring it against? What are we trying to achieve as a brand? I think that's, for us, where we've got really tighter internally in briefing and being clear about where we want that customer and what we want that customer to go on.
I think it's a very good point. It should be a two-way street. I think there are obligations on the client and their trading partners to be transparent in both directions, actually, and we don't always see that.
And then there's the transparency with the buyers and the technology. are they telling you the right solution, or are they selling you the solution? And there's a transparency about openness about what is actually feasible.
And that's a big part. I think it's a really big point, because the technology companies have never really dealt with transparent media in many ways. It's not really part of their DNA. And especially if you look at ad tech, there's a whole heap of stuff that goes on in ad tech which is there to really optimize to a click and maximize to a margin. And if you do that, that's a problem, because you end up chasing very poor quality inventory and all that type of stuff. But it's very difficult for some companies, I think, to be able to explain what they do sometimes.
And for me, that point is all around transparency and operating methods.
Yeah.
I mean, as a brand or an IP owner, you're trusting intermediaries with your brand, with your livelihood, and you can't get the most out of that relationship unless you are completely clear around what methods you're using with that IP.
And you all kind of mentioned there the interesting thing that came out was collaboration. Actually, everyone's got to come together and do it. But how do we achieve that? And I suppose who leads that? You talk from a tech perspective, because you're right, it's not in your DNA necessarily, right up to the brand. But yes, sorry. From a lot of tech companies, it's very difficult. So who kind of leads that charge, if you like, and how do we get everyone in a room besides this to discuss where we go and what we do as an industry?
Well, I think the point is that each individual client has to do that for themselves,
yes.
Especially the way things are at the moment, because there's nobody really moving these chess pieces around. There's nobody responsible for all of this. There are lots of trade bodies who may or may not talk to each other or do anything, or try and bring in standards like the MRC, for example. But there's no leader. Your point is correct. There is nobody leading that. Yeah. Therefore, what we tend to say to our clients is, you're going to have to do this for yourself. You're going to have to look after your own interests, pending some kind of industry consensus on all these matters. But don't wait around for that, because it's going to be a little while, because there is no natural leader of all of this.
An individual who has a quest to do such a thing, where do we stand?
The difficulty IOB have is that their funding model is based around publishers, and some of the biggest publishers happen to be Facebook and Google. So I guess if those guys decide that they think transparency is a really core part of their business, then obviously you'll see change, but I don't know whether that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, this is a real bugbear of mine. This notion of waiting for a central body to come in and police this industry into a point of where we can all trust each other more, versus being able to self-initiate that oneself. Because I truly believe that in this next phase of where this industry is going, it's the players that truly live a transparent mindset in all of their operations, which will be the ones that succeed. And I think even the big players. Last week, Facebook announced that they're moving from a complete black box model to a more transparent model. So
less untransparent.
Opaque.
Yeah.
So I think even the big guys like Facebook are realizing that they need to be able to embrace this themselves and drive it from within in order to not lose share themselves.
I think the reality is that brands, agencies, and ed tech companies, those that are honorable and honest in their businesses, will lead the market forward. We've formed a body, but we're doing it with no horse in the race, acting as Switzerland and bringing brands, agencies, and the tech community together. Because your point about the IAB serving publishers is just right. They're going to do what's in the best interests of the publishers, and more importantly, in the best interest of those publishers that are writing the big checks, not necessarily, and the A&A and the 4As, for that matter, do the same thing for brands and agencies. So when we established our body, we did it to truly be Switzerland, without a horse in the race, to say someone's got to advance this, and we want to bring the market together to do it.
And how has that been so far in terms of trying to bring everyone together?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's U.S. focused, so certainly we need to grow it to be more of a global body. But there's about 70 companies involved, several of the holding companies. So from a buy side, there's great representation. Most of the bigger publishers on the broadcast side, the top 5 or 6 DSPs, SSPs, and DMPs and data companies. So those that are truly most honorable in those respective categories were the first to raise their hand and say, yes, let's solve this together. And if nothing else, they have more credibility with the buyers because they're stepping up and saying, we're willing to try and attempt to solve this problem. I think the next step, more than likely, is going to be something like blockchain that will come to bear. And with blockchain, a lot of the transparency issues will go away just by the very nature of the technology. So.
And that's a good question to ask, actually, in terms of where we get to from a can you actually achieve transparency? We talk about blockchain. How far away are we from getting to an acceptable level, I suppose, is number one, and can we actually achieve transparency as a whole, do you think, as an industry?
Just very quickly on that point, I think the problem at the moment is that the industry has grown up in an untransparent way, and therefore transitioning to transparency is going to be a long, hard road.
Yes.
Because in order to achieve that, everyone has to go transparent, and that's going to be a long, hard road.
Well,
and so just the other point is that this isn't just about digital. I know you talked about the IAB just now. It starts way above that.
That's right.
This covers the whole industry and always has done. So even if you start to make progress in the digital world, you can't just leave it there. You have to look at the whole thing.
And the reality is, those that are screaming the most about the issue which is the brands. Mark Pritchard went out and made a pretty bold statement. I was on the client side myself. We created this issue because we said we're going to drive your rates down to our agency partners. They then push down on the inventory providers. And it's great now that they want to solve it, but brands and agencies also need to take some responsibility for the fact that they created this animal. And it's positive that most are acknowledging that and are willing to work together to find a way to solve it.
And the technologies have got a big part to play here. They're the ones that are collecting this supply. They have access to all the inventory. If something comes through to them that is unrecognized or hidden or is a network, so a URL comes to buy, but it's actually a network of 1,000 URLs, that's non-transparent. I don't know what I'm buying. That shouldn't be allowed. And we're in a weird place where this is arguably the most trackable medium of marketing, where you can pixel and you can track almost every single impression, but we're still talking about not being able to track it, which is crazy.
2 points I hope that came out of the conversation there is one about structure and team structures within companies and being able to cope with this new world, and also the fact that actually you're absolutely right, Nick, in that it has to be across the whole piece and not just digital. Digital almost has acted as an amplifier, I suppose. And are we in danger of forgetting, we talk about transparency and we do happen to move into that digital space when we talk about it. Are we forgetting about the fact that you need transparency and everything else as an industry? And is that a danger for us?
I think it is a danger because the discourse always goes towards digital, and that could distract from the bigger picture. Yes. So, and if you look at because we wrote the guidelines for the ANA last year that followed on from the K2 intelligence report, and those guidelines don't specify digital, non-digital. They just talk about how you achieve transparency in your operations as an advertiser. And we deliberately didn't say this applies to digital, that doesn't. Of course it talks about viewability, brand safety, ad fraud, ad blocking, all those things within it, but advertisers don't just advertise on digital, generally speaking, they advertise on all sorts of things. And you have to start at the top and work your way down, and then have specific actions you take by medium to achieve transparency, because they all work in different ways. So to talk about digital can be, it is the worst problem, but it can distract from the bigger picture.
Is it the worst problem? If you look at television and the billions spent on television and the packaging that's done in upfronts to accomplish those deals, some of the least transparent in terms of the way they're bundling the inventory to give you a lower effective price for your media.
I guess what I mean by that is that if you advertise on television, broadly speaking, and traditionally, and Sital will probably correct my numbers here, you think 90% of my money is going to be exposed to consumers. 10% is going to go in fees and stuff. Yeah. In the online space, we know that 40% of the money is actually going to go into media inventory. Yeah. 60% is going to go into service fees, production, data, and so on and so forth. So there's a massive difference there, and then that's before you hit viewability and ad fraud and so on and so forth. And we did a study in the US recently with AdFin, and that showed that 40% of the money in disclosed deals goes into service fees and charges and so on and so forth. And we couldn't even look at undisclosed deals because they're undisclosed. So the term what I'm talking about there is that the working money versus the non-working money is a real problem in digital.
But as a brand, you choose who you work with, right? So ultimately, if you're not happy with your partner, it's our responsibility to choose a transparent partner who's going to try and make it as much transparent for us. I also wonder whether in the future the chain will shrink, right? If technology continues to improve, actually how many partners will I need? Actually, maybe it will be more cost effective for me to even do it myself. The technology might allow us to in-house that and then own the transparency ourselves. So the technology and the change from a brand perspective, I think, comes back to exactly what you said. You choose who you work with, right?
That's a great point, because as brands and advertisers, we have to take our future in our own hands. That's absolutely clear. What needs to happen and will happen continues to be debated, discussed as an industry, will need to happen at a separate level. But we take our future in our own hands, and with technology now, especially with the self-serving platforms, etc., we are able to start doing things ourselves. So bring in the competence within the company and start managing it ourselves. And that is where the real discussion is happening across several advertisers, like what you mentioned, is what can we do ourselves and what do we need to still partner up.
But that's not a conversation about transparency, because the agency can still give you absolutely everything, can tell you everything in the chain. Yeah. So that's a very different conversation to owning the tech versus being transparent with your partners.
But arguably, the pace of transition may have been triggered by the lack of transparency in the past, which is now got people thinking, well, how do I get there faster?
And don't be fooled that just because you're white labeling a DSP or using a self-service tool from one of the leading DSPs that you're transparent. I mean, I've worked at one of those top DSPs, and one of their biggest margins is data, and it's not fully transparent. You'd be surprised what you're actually getting, what the markups are.
No, I'm not saying that it's between today and tomorrow things will change. Sure. It's a continuous process of improvement, and if you're seeing the improvement from day one to day two, I believe we as advertisers at least are in a space where we can be comfortable that we are driving more value for the investments that my company is making to engage with those consumers.
And that's the biggest change in the last 12 months, I think, is the level of awareness amongst client companies now that they absolutely do have to manage and control this process. Yeah. And they should, and they need to have very clear governance guidelines for doing that. They need to have a roadmap, they need to have the right resources in place. Whether you go the whole route and say, let's take some of those services in-house or not, you may not want to do that, but at least have governance processes that sort of say, I'm going to work with third parties, but I'm actually going to take a real interest in it and have the right contracts with the right people that I've chosen, and I'm going to get the right level of reporting and the right level of transparency. This conversation probably wouldn't have happened in this way 12 months ago. Yeah, so correct. I think good progress has been made in that regard.
But sorry, do you think that clients are asking enough of the right questions? Because I think one of the interesting things we see is client teams not really understanding all the questions they should ask to get to this transparent world that they are trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's what I was
back to your DSP.
That's exactly what I was just going to hit on. I mean, our other half of our business, the consultancy, is completely thriving because clients are saying, I'm going to bring this in-house. And first off, they say, can you help us select the right partner to do it? And then we say, well, all right, do you understand the other questions you need to ask? And most have no clue to ask about, are the verification tools being marked up? Is data being marked up? There's 30 different things in the chain that you may be getting from a self-service partner that could be the best partner in the world, but that is not fully transparent. So unless you ask those questions and expose that to ensure you have complete transparency, you're still...
That's great business for you when you are in the process of educating clients and making a business out of that as well, which makes sense. But to Nick's point, the discussion that's happening amongst clients, at least for example in forums like the WFA, it's a far improved discussion than we were having 12 to 18 months back. Yeah. And that is, it's a process. It's not a start-stop sort of situation.
When you don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
But Paul's right though, is that we spend a huge amount of our time educating our clients on how, in particular in digital, how the market works, and they really find it very difficult because it is. And they also get shocked when they discover just how little they knew before, and that can create its own reaction. And it is complex, and it's deliberately complex in many instances because the black boxes make it hard to understand.
Do you think the whole industry has to go as far as something like the financial services industry, where you have total transparency, much more, that ability to be able to understand exactly what you're buying, who's owning what, all the way through the chain. That industry's been shaken up over the last 10 years. Do you think this industry should be shaken up in the same way?
I think that will happen, and if it doesn't happen voluntarily, it will be imposed.
Yes.
It will happen, and I mentioned blockchain earlier. I think blockchain will be the technology that solves for a lot of this, and it will be completely transparent, whether anyone likes it or not.
There's still an element which is how the agencies, with all of their clients, manage that spend across the inventory available and the technology, and do they prioritize different partners to benefit as an agency and collect rebates? That's still potentially non-transparent to clients. Like, you've taken my money, and did you make the best decision for me, or did you make the best decision for yourselves? And that's got to be probably the biggest conversation that agencies should.
But the smart clients are onto that now, and they're kind of much more aware of it than they were 12 months ago.
That's right.
The ANA certainly helped in that. So that level of awareness is improving dramatically. Just at the same time, of course, once you know about things like cash rebates, you also have to know about all of the other things. But this is not done yet.
It's a process.
But it is a process, and it has started, and there's been distinct movement in the last 12 months. I think Pritchard made a big difference to that.
Yes, indeed.
I think the whole issue of brand safety has made a big difference. It doesn't look as though it's related to these things, but it absolutely is. Mm-hmm. So there's now a groundswell that's turned this from being quite a small thing into quite a big movement, I think.
And a couple of points that came out of that, Paul. One was about the technology being transparent from the start. How do you ensure that from a technology perspective, you're starting that process?
Well, the interesting thing about my company is it was built by a bunch of people outside of advertising, so that's probably why it started off being transparent, because they didn't understand the way otherwise. So, and actually you can do it, but it's quite challenging, because ultimately you have to optimize to slightly different way, perhaps, in terms of where you operate your campaigns. I mean, I think the big problem with digital is everyone's obsessed by the small percentage of people who click on an ad, and we've developed technology around that, which is basically being, footballers hanging around the goal and just waiting to kick in and take credit for it, and not do the bit in the middle. And that's encouraged, I think, some of the types of technologies, and therefore the lack of transparency that goes with it. So we actually provide log files. If someone wants a log file of every single ad they bought, they can have one from us. And there's no reason why other platforms can't do that. But the trouble is, if they provide that, then potentially it opens up a whole load of other questions about how they got to where they got to and why they bought that.
But they do if it's in a disclosed deal. If it's in an undisclosed deal, you get zilch. In other words, if you've opted into one of these deals, you do not get any of that data at all. Even though the log files technically are available, you get no access to them at all. So the first one of the things that advertisers got to ask themselves is, do I want to go for a totally transparent model, or do I want to take the apparent benefits of an untransparent model on an opt-in basis? And we say, be very careful with that, because if you don't know anything about where your advertising is going, what it costs, who it's reached, then you're just taking a cheaper price, and cheaper price does not mean effectiveness. Mm-hmm.
And how are you finding that when you're talking, from your perspectives? Obviously, in certain climates, going cheaper is obviously an option with procurement companies, procurement departments that you don't really have much of a say in. How are you kind of fighting back against your bosses that say, we want to go for the cheaper option, and you have to say, well, actually, we need to be more transparent, so we shouldn't be going for that option. How far along the line are we in terms of education from that sense?
I think we are, in that sense, lucky within our company that it's not procurement driving those decisions. It's business that's driving decisions, because we need to show results to our CMO, and that result is not just efficiency but effectiveness of the investments. It's business, and business is, as long as business is driving, I don't think cost is the only issue. And over a period of time, our procurement teams have also realized that driving just on cost will not help them. So the metrics that they're using go beyond cost now.
Yeah, same for us. Procurement don't negotiate those deals, because they tend to have a cost-saving objective, right? That's what their business objective isn't the commercial objective that we're trying to achieve. So we don't let them touch it. Secondly, I think it comes back to the effectiveness piece, right? We've got to be clear about what we want to achieve, and then we should find the best way of achieving our business results. And I'd rather spend more but ensure I'm getting the right result because otherwise I'm not going to move the needle on my business, my commercial objectives I'm trying to achieve. So it just comes back to understanding what you want to achieve, what's the most effective way of getting there, and as you say, if you buy cheap, you buy twice, right? If you buy cheap, it's not going to move the needle. I'm not going to sell any more cameras or printers or whatever it is. So ultimately, measuring the effectiveness is really, really important. But it shouldn't just be about the money. And also, as your point earlier, if we keep driving everything down, then we're driving everyone to the wrong behaviour because everyone's saying, well, I don't earn enough money. So there's got to be enough money for everyone to make it work.
Yeah, people just need to be prepared to pay for quality. We've driven price down and you've gotten shit, right? So pay a little more, you get the quality, and you get the right business outcomes.
And there is a realization also within the company, at least I can speak for ourselves, is that driving costs down does not get the best out of partners. We have done that for years and years, be it the agency partners or other tech partners. You are trying to provide them absolute business sense to be able to partner up with you, and then they are driving value for you. Also with agency partners, it has been till now, I think, a race to the activation part of it. So as fast as they can get that money out with publishers, they have made their whatever dollars or euros or whatever you may call it. But now we are trying to support agency partners to add value in the upper part of the funnel, in the strategic work that they do with us, because that is where I think they see that they can incrementally add value, and we see that that's something that possibly we will never be able to get to the level of information, data, industry knowledge that they have and competence. So we are able to leverage that for ourselves rather than just activating for us.
This is where the whole 60 cents in a dollar thing comes in, because that gets paid whether the advertising appears or not, or is effective or not. That's the problem with the online display supply chain, is that everyone's making money irrespective of whether the advertising works. And that's the inverse of the traditional model, where people used to do well when the client did well. So the publisher did well, media owners did well, media agencies did well, and everybody else benefited from that. At the moment, it's been completely tipped over, and that's the thing that needs to be reversed.
How do we go about that? How do we get that reverse in place? We talked about, from a brand perspective, the structure within teams, the fact that you guys have made progress in the last 12 months, 2 years, and we talk about things like blockchain. Does that mean we're going to see a complete disruption of the industry and the cycle that we're in? Will that happen, do we think, in 12 months?
Well, I think the thing to do is ask the clients, because they're the ones who drive this.
Who would like to go first?
It'd be interesting if the model changed to more of a performance-related pay then, wouldn't it? How would you set the KPIs that would reward everyone in the chain based on my business results?
So I think programmatic, the medium of buying and cherry-picking inventory, is probably going to be the solution. It's going to decrease frequency massively. So when you sign off a media plan, instead of it being 30,000, if you manage your frequency, if you plan it properly across all channels, and now starting to look at TV, you can really start to see cost savings. That's going to be where everyone benefits, where you're almost buying on a place-by-place basis. If you give 30,000 to, not going to name one, but one of the companies over there, which is a managed service, black box solution, they will spend 30,000. Done. Sign the IO, we will deliver all those impressions for you. That's not transparent, and that's not very nice, because they're going to maybe hit your performance and then just start to hit the 30,000, which isn't very good. So I think it's having a really clean understanding of when not to spend, when to spend. Programmatic, one of the best things about programmatic is exclusion, just to not target someone after they've seen a certain amount of ads, or if they're in the wrong audience.
But you're right, it can only work if it's transparent, because if they've got three companies trying to do the same thing to the same user, then you end up with three.
And it creates a different construct for the clients and the agencies to be able to collaborate better on effectiveness, right? So rather than the client just throwing a brief with a KPI and they often hit it, like the whole notion around transparency is that you can now work more closely with each other to drive the trust and drive to a better outcome, which is surely better for both sides of the equation.
But the likelihood of that really working is a bit further off, and the reason I say that is because you could have the best idea and the best media and the worst creative, and while you have the best media and the best idea, you can't blame them if the creative sucked and the campaign didn't perform. So I think the way that happens and is successful over time is, as we're already seeing, consolidation in the agency world. when creative is part of the same group that's being measured on the same outcomes, works together with media to ensure that they're playing nice. Because the creative shop and the media shop is separate. Creative shop's going to go off and do whatever the heck they care to do, and don't necessarily care whether or not the media performed. I mean, they should, but in many cases, creatives have big egos. They're going to do what they think is right versus what will necessarily drive business outcomes.
But we have that. So when we have our strategic response to the brief, we have the media partner and the creative in the room, and you can just see the tension in the room, whether they agree or don't agree, right? You can see. So if they don't agree, then you know that you're not buying it, right? Because it doesn't work. So by banging them together a lot earlier, I think it makes it a lot clearer. Exactly. You might have to pick it apart and decide which one you want to align with a bit, but ultimately, I think it is that holding them accountable up front, and just you can read people, can't you? It shouldn't be a chain where you're passing it from one to the next because then that's historically the way we used to work, and invariably it didn't work because they were saying, well, it's like saying the creative's crap or the media buying's crap. Well, actually, exactly, and that's from a client perspective the worst position to be in.
Well, I think we do the same. We bring them together. But what we have also done over the past, say, a year or so, is made sure that the media agencies, remit comes much more upfront. Yeah. In fact, it informs the overall briefing that's developed, and that's then shared with the creative agency to work the creative idea out of. That is helping. And if there are partners who are still, there's still a tension between them, as long as it's a healthy tension, it's great. Mm-hmm. But if it goes beyond that, then we again should be able to choose who we want to work and create the future that we want for ourselves, I think.
And it's not science marketing, so it's not a definite kind of here's the KPI we're going to hit this. So the tracking of attribution, the cross-device tracking, frequency management, all that kind of stuff is post-campaign very important. And again, a big transparent conversation when you're talking to your client about why it didn't work.
But I do see agency partners are really waking up now. Yeah. They have been late in the process, but they are really waking up, understanding that to continue growing business and being in business, they need to now listen up and be the real partners that we're looking for as advertisers. And I must say that the partners that we work with, they are even open to being part of the overall profit loss of the company, that mechanism as part of their remuneration, which is great because though they do not influence the creative itself, they're still open to that ownership, which I think is the way to go.
And what has caused them to become more flexible and open up?
We work with the same agency partners for the past 15 years and more now. Yeah, it's just the continuous development and of the process, bringing them in, making them more accountable, making them more immersed in our processes.
It's that in the last 18 months of God knows how many pitches have happened. The smarter agencies are realizing that if we don't figure out a way to make this work, we're going to be in pitch hell for the next 5 years.
It is interesting that Havas have now announced that they're going to have a completely transparent, totally transparent, utterly transparent trading desk, which if true, and that remains to be seen, would be quite a significant milestone, I think, if it's true, because the trading desks haven't been up until now historically, and this would be the first of its kind, I think it's fair to say. Yeah. So that could be quite an interesting step, because it's a bit like sort of saying to all the other guys, you need one of these. Yeah. Yeah. And as the smallest of the big groups, six groups, I guess it's almost like challenger brands territory to sort of say, we're going to do this, and you need to, we'll show you ours if you show us yours.
That solution has existed since the dawn of time. It's called a report. It's called this is what we did. So I don't know. Personally, I don't think it needs that much of PR around it. It should just be standard.
We know that. Unfortunately, it hasn't been.
But I mean, it's good that it's coming to the fore again, and agencies are starting to take notice. I mean, obviously different from an independent one. You're a lot more flexible, agile.
We started fully transparent. So yes. But I've previously been at Dentsu, and some of their clients are fully transparent. Some of their clients completely own the technology. So it comes down to understanding what you need. Yeah.
So what does the next 12 months, what does good look like for the next 2 months when it comes to transparency and how we develop? We've talked about how we've gone on this journey over the last couple of years, but how do we really push forward now as an industry? What needs to be done, and kind of what's the time frame, do we think, if we had to kind of look ahead?
It comes back to your leadership point again, though, Jeremy, is that there's no natural leader other than the advertisers here. And they have to do it for themselves, one by one. And there are, very, very strong advertiser associations, but they can't do it on behalf of their members. It has to be done client by client, because otherwise, who's going to get the consensus between the advertising technology companies, the different kinds of agencies, the media owners? Who's going to create all these standard measurement criteria? Who? The answer is there is no obvious party to do that. And it's not going to happen if the ANA and the 4As start to kiss each other either. It won't naturally bubble out of that. So there is no leader, and therefore it's down to each advertiser on their own to do it. And things will only change when enough advertisers say, this is how I'm going to run my affairs from now on, as we're hearing from here.
I think it's tough if it's just the advertisers, though, because there are bigger publishers, whether they be digital or linear or print or out of home, that feel like they are still in a power position, and are able to say no, and some of them you still have to buy. So that's why I think what we've been doing, playing the Switzerland role, is so important. I think you really need to have the advertisers drive it, and they need to stress how important it is. But you need to have the others around the table so they understand why you're asking for it. Not that they don't, but having them be part of the conversation, I think, speeds this along.
I think on the ad tech scene, I think within 12 months we'll see significant shifts in how people approach transparency, how they embody it as organizations, and I think we've already seen from 12 months prior fortunes change fairly significantly with players embracing that more. So I only see that accelerating for the next year.
I agree that as advertisers we need to take things in our hand, but also what will let's say complicate matters is the entire area of privacy, which we haven't discussed today. But with things like GDPR coming in May of next year, we really need to see how all these things need to again be mashed up, possibly to be compliant, because as an advertiser we are absolutely clear that we need to adhere to all data privacy rules. So it's an interesting space to watch the next 12 months as well for us.
And I think the other thing is, I think as transparent businesses demonstrate efficiencies and benefits to people, then people will start realizing actually it's a good place to go.
That's right.
It was interesting. I was judging an awards recently, not one of yours, sorry. But the interesting thing was that the winners of a lot of the categories were, and this is just pragmatic, generally were pretty transparent. They were either transparent on the agency side or the transparent on the technology side. And I don't know whether that's coincidence, but it seemed like that they were driving much more better business outcomes for their clients because they were approaching it the right way than some of the other entries that had come through.
I think part of this also comes down to the way that Facebook and Google decide they want to move their businesses, because they're under a lot of pressure right now to be more transparent across the board, particularly about content. And I think if they decide to take a leadership position in the marketplace and be more transparent in the way that they conduct advertising business, that'll force the whole industry to go the same route. Whether they will or not, I don't know. But if they do, that would be a fantastic leap forward, because those two are driving the entire industry right now, and that's not going to change anytime soon either.
I think the ad tech also needs to be less of a sell and a confusion and AI and algorithms and RTB and PPC. It needs to be a little bit cleaner so that agencies aren't kind of sold something that doesn't make sense to them, and so they have 30 different providers and they literally can't pick and choose because they've all been kind of confusing each other. So I think a clarity needs to come around what solutions actually do and what business benefit that is.
Yeah, I mean, the duopoly obviously is interesting. Facebook, Google. I mean, do you if you really thought about, do you think we'll get to a place where they will stand up and go for it and make a difference and lead the industry?
If they do, I think that will be pressure, not with all due respect, from the advertising side of life. I think that will come from a much higher level, which is a sense that if you're going to have a massive global duopoly, which has been completely uncontrolled and unregulated, then you have certain responsibilities. And they're starting to, I think that message is now coming through thanks to brand safety. And that will, I think eventually that'll trickle down to this level and start to sort of say, you know, if you want to carry on being unregulated, then there are certain behaviours that you're going to have to follow. And I think eventually that will start to permeate within the industry and make them more transparent in the way they do business. That then will put pressure on some of the other companies in the sector to do the same thing. So I think the whole transparency thing will be bottom up and top down. I think there'll be a certain amount of pressure from the advertiser community, but I think the threat of regulation will always be there as well. And that will put pressure on that part of the industry. So I'm hoping that will squeeze the whole thing into a more transparent shape.
Yeah. Okay. I think we are actually at 1 o'clock. That is the time. And Lee has a flight to catch as well. So yeah, Canon haven't developed jets yet, but he's got to use EasyJet. So well, thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated.